A year of exactly 364 days, exactly 52 weeks. No remainder. Every festival lands on the same weekday, every year, forever. New Year is always a Wednesday, because Wednesday is the day God made the sun. No holy day ever collides with the Sabbath. This is the oldest detailed calendar in Jewish literature, dictated to Enoch by the angel Uriel as law. And the text that carries it calls counting your days wrongly a sin. Not an error, a sin. And today, no living tradition keeps it. Not the synagogue, not the church, no one. By the end of this video, you will understand how the 364-day calendar works. The 12 months, the 4 added days, the week machine at its core. Why the text treats timekeeping as obedience. How this calendar became the dividing line of a religious war whose casualties are documented in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And how the reckoning of time your calendar app inherited defeated it. Because whoever counts the days decides when the sacred happens, which day is a festival, which day is ordinary, which fast counts, and which does not. If two communities keep two calendars, they do not merely disagree about dates. They live in two different sacred worlds. This episode is about what happens when that disagreement stops being theoretical. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, there is an account of 2 men and 1 date. For one of them, that date was the Day of Atonement. The holiest day of his year, a day of fasting, when travel and confrontation were unthinkable. For the other man, the same date was nothing at all. And because it was nothing to him, he was free to march. Hold who these 2 men were, and what happened when he arrived. The Astronomical Book of 1st Enoch is not stargazing. It is legislation, dictated by an angel to a scribe, in a text where the sun is not an object but a subject, something that complies. By the end of this chapter, you will understand what kind of document this is, the architecture of its year, and why its governing frame is obedience rather than observation. Start with where the text sits. Chapters 72 to 82 of 1st Enoch form the section scholars call the Astronomical Book, sometimes the Book of the Luminaries. On the scholarly dating, it belongs among the oldest strata of the Enochic corpus. Aramaic fragments of it, recovered from the caves at Qumran, catalogued as 4, Q208 through 4, Q211, reach back to around the 3rd century BCE. Hold that date in place. It means the calendar this text carries is older than much of the Hebrew Bible in its finished form. And it is why the standard critical commentary on these chapters, Nicolsburg, in Vonderkam's Hermania volume, treats this material as foundational to everything the Enochic tradition later became. It is worth being precise about what oldest detailed calendar means. The Hebrew Bible dates its festivals, the 14th day of the 1st month, the 10th day of the 7th, but it never lays out the year those dates live in. How long is a month? How many days does the year hold? What sits at its edges? No biblical text says. The Astronomical Book is the first surviving Jewish document to answer, to set out the complete skeleton of a year, month by month, day count by day count. Whatever else this text is, it is the moment Jewish literature stops assuming a calendar and starts legislating one. and it announces that character in its opening line. First, Enoch 72:1 introduces what follows as the book of the courses of the luminaries of heaven. Shown to Enoch, the text says, by Uriel, the holy angel who was with him, their appointed guide. Note the verb, shown. Enoch does not study the sky and work out its patterns. He is walked through a system by the being who administers it, and he writes down what he is told. From its first sentence, this is not a record of discovery. It is a transmission. Viewers of this channel's first Uriel episode will recognize the machinery underneath. The sun entering and leaving the sky through 12 gates, 6 in the east and 6 in the west. The moon assigned its phases by rule. Winds, seasons, and stars each holding a station and a schedule. A cosmos that is order all the way down, with Uriel as its custodian. That frame was established there, and this single paragraph of orientation is all this episode takes from it. Because this episode is not about the machinery. It is about the number the machinery produces. 12 months of 30 days each. That gives 360. Then 4 more days. 1 added at each turning of the year. 1 at each season's hinge. First Enoch 75. 1 to 2 handles these 4 intercalary days with a care that borders on anxiety. They have their own leaders among the stars. They stand apart from the ordinary count of the months, and people go wrong about the year, the text warns, precisely because they fail to reckon them. 30 times 12 plus 4. First Enoch 74, 10 to 12. Runs the sums and seals the total. 364 days. The text does not offer that number as a measurement, open to refinement. It states it the way a statute states a boundary. The 4 days even have officers. Chapter 82 sets named angelic leaders over the seasons and their stars. Commanders of thousands, ranked and stationed, so that the turning points of the year are not calendrical conveniences, but posts that are held. The text is doing with the year what a state does with a border, assigning guards to it. And that is why the omission of the 4 days troubles it so deeply. To drop them from the count is not a rounding choice. It is a dereliction. And around the number, the text builds a moral architecture. The luminaries of heaven do not merely move. The section's refrain is command language, courses completed as ordered, stations kept as appointed. Then in chapter 82, the frame reaches down to human beings. First Enoch 82, 4-6 pronounces a blessing on the righteous, on those who do not sin, as the sinners do in the reckoning of their days, and fixes the year at 364 in the same breath. Hear how strange that is. A blessing for counting correctly, sin for counting wrongly. No document of ancient astronomy, Babylonian, Egyptian, Greek, speaks this way about arithmetic. Babylon kept centuries of meticulous sky diaries. They record, they predict. They do not command. Observation can be mistaken. Only law can be disobeyed. Uriel does not show Enoch the sky. He shows him the law the sky obeys. The sun does not travel. It complies. 12 months of 30 days, 4 days standing guard at the seasons, 364, no more, no less. And then the text says something no astronomy says. counting it wrongly is not a mistake. It is a sin. That is this chapter's single claim, stated plainly. The Astronomical Book presents timekeeping as law. The sky is the first lawkeeper, the sun in its gates, the stars at their stations, complying. The human counter is the second. To reckon the days rightly is to stand inside an obedient cosmos. To miscount is to fall out of that obedience. Everything else in this episode, the sect, the confrontation, the war over sacred time, follows from that single move. The moment a calendar stops being a tool and becomes a commandment. And the commandment has a future. Centuries after these chapters were composed, two men will stand on opposite sides of a single date because of it. One fasting, one marching. Their day has not yet come. A year dictated as statute, sealed at 364. But the number is not astronomy. It is architecture. And what it is built to protect is the week. 364 divides by 7, with nothing left over, 52 weeks exactly. And that single arithmetical fact is the entire design. By the end of this chapter, you will understand what a 52-week year makes possible. Festivals that never move, a Sabbath that is never displaced, and a liturgical world with no scheduling conflicts. Ever. Run the division. 364 days. 7 days to the week. 52 weeks. Remainder 0. That 0 is everything. It means that if the year always begins on the same day of the week, then every date in the year is welded to a weekday, permanently. The first day of the first month falls on the same weekday this year, next year, and in 1,000 years. So does the 14th. So does every festival the year contains. Not usually, not with adjustments, always automatically by arithmetic alone. A date in this system is not an appointment, it is a coordinate. Which weekday anchors it? On the standard scholarly reconstruction of the system, the year opens on the 4th day of the week, Wednesday, because Genesis places the creation of the sun, moon, and stars on the 4th day. A calendar of luminaries begins its count where the luminaries themselves began. And from that single anchor, the entire grid unrolls. On this reconstruction, Passover's festival day falls forever on a Wednesday, the Festival of Weeks forever on a Sunday, the Day of Atonement forever on a Friday. A worshiper under this calendar could name the weekday of every festival their grandchildren would ever keep. Because liturgy in this system is geometry. Nothing is negotiated because nothing can move. The 4 added days do quiet structural work here as well. One stands at each season's turn, which cuts the year into 4 identical quarters of 91 days, 13 weeks exactly each. 91 days, 13 weeks, 4 times over. The 4 extra days sitting at the joints, holding the panels apart like keystones. The seasons are not approximate stretches of weather. They are equal panels of a fixed design, each opening on the same weekday as the last. The year does not merely contain weeks, it is built out of them. And for a priestly mind, the payoff is total. With every date fixed, the entire service of a sanctuary can be timetabled in perpetuity. Which offerings on which day, which family on duty in which week, which festival at which turn of the season, written once, valid forever. No annual proclamation, no waiting on the moon. a liturgy that runs like the sky it mirrors, automatically and without exception. Now watch what this abolishes. In any calendar tied to the moon, dates wander across the week. So sooner or later, a festival lands on the Sabbath, and the tradition must adjudicate which command wins, the festival's required actions or the Sabbath's required rest. Later, Jewish law would develop careful rules for exactly such collisions, because when a festival's preparations press against the Sabbath's rest, something has to give, and someone has to say what. The 364-day year makes the entire category of problem impossible. With every date fixed to its weekday, the system's designers could place the festivals so that none ever falls on the Sabbath, and on the standard reconstruction, none does. No collision, no adjudication, no exception clause in any year ever. The Sabbath sits untouched at the center of the machine, and the machine is built so that nothing can ever reach it. Set that against the reckoning that governed actual practice. A lunar month runs about 29 and a half days. 12 of them make roughly 354, 11 days short of the sun. A calendar that follows the moon must therefore negotiate constantly. Months alternating 29 and 30 days, and a whole extra month inserted every 2 or 3 years to hold the festivals in their seasons. That, on the standard account, was the lunisolar system that governed the Jerusalem temple. Months by the moon, the year corrected to the sun. It works. It has worked in its rabbinic form for 2,000 years. But it buys its accuracy with motion and with management. Dates slide across the week, the year changes length, and someone must observe, someone must declare, someone must decide. Set the two experiences side by side. Under the moon's reckoning, a village learns that the festival is near when word arrives from the court. The month began when witnesses said so, and next year it will begin somewhere else. Under Enoch's reckoning, there is nothing to learn and no one to wait for. The festival is where it has always been and where it will always be, as fixed as the number 7. One system delivers sacred time as news. The other delivers it as fact. The Enochic year needs no one. No observation, no declaration, no court. The grid was set, on the text's own account, into creation itself, and it runs without permission. And notice what that difference does to power. A calendar that requires decisions places authority in the hands of whoever decides. A calendar that forbids decisions withdraws that authority from everyone. Hold that thought lightly for now. It returns with force in the desert. This is the chapter's single claim. The 364-day year is a liturgical machine. Its designers were not trying to match the sun as closely as numbers allow. Nothing in the sky yields 52 exact weeks. They were building immovability, a sacred order that cannot be dragged by the moon, adjusted by a court, or moved by anyone. As James Vanderkam's standard treatment of the tradition emphasizes, the fixed point of this system is the week itself. Everything else in the year is arranged in its service. The purpose of the 364-day year is not to track the sky. It is to make sacred time immovable. But a machine this rigid has one vulnerability, and it is not the sky. A calendar built to be immovable cannot coexist with another. Two reckonings of the sacred cannot share one temple. The two men who will prove it are drawing closer. A calendar built for perfection of order. And the obvious modern objection is that it bought that perfection by being wrong about the sun. The case that this calendar is simply failed. Ancient science has genuine force. The drift problem is real, and it is not small. By the end of this chapter, you will understand that case at full strength, the live scholarly debate over how the system handled it, and why the text's own frame dismantles the verdict. So state the comfortable reading plainly, because it deserves to be heard at full volume. The Astronomical Book is ancient science that failed. The solar year does not run 364 days. It runs about 365 and a quarter. A 364-day year therefore loses roughly a day and a quarter every year against the seasons, and the loss compounds. After 8 years, the calendar runs 10 days ahead of the sun. After a decade, a fortnight. Within a single generation, more than a month, a spring festival drifting backwards through late winter. A harvest festival arriving before anything has been harvested. An agricultural festival calendar that ignores agriculture is not a small failure. On this reading, it is the whole verdict. The calendar died the way all bad astronomy dies, by being wrong, historically interesting, theologically empty. And before dismantling that verdict, be honest about its force, because the scholarship is. The drift is genuine, and the sources make the problem harder, not easier. No surviving text from this tradition describes a correction mechanism. The documents legislate 364 and stop. That silence is the pivot of the modern argument, because silence can mean a mechanism too obvious to record, or no mechanism at all. Otto Neugebauer, whose technical analysis of the Astronomical Book remains foundational, read the system as schematic through and through, ideal patterns rather than observational records, and the modern debate splits along exactly that line. James van der Kam has argued that a community keeping this calendar could have intercalated in practice, inserting days or weeks at intervals to pull the count back level with the sun, and has set out reconstructions of how such correction might have run. Sasha Stern, in Calendar and Community, presses the skepticism. No ancient source attests any such mechanism, and the 364-day year may never have functioned as a working civil calendar at all. A schematic ideal kept on parchment, while daily life ran on other reckonings. That debate is live and unresolved, and this episode will not resolve it. But notice what both positions concede. If the system ran uncorrected, it drifted, visibly, within a lifetime. The comfortable reading has real teeth. So why not close the file there? Because the verdict answers a question the text never asks. Go back to what the Astronomical Book actually presents. It does not present observations, refined against the sky and open to error. It presents statutes, numbers arriving with the grammar of command, not the grammar of measurement. The sun keeps commandments. The luminaries are lawkeepers before they are lights. Enoch is not taught how the heavens happen to behave. He is shown, in the text's own framing, the laws they obey. Judged as astronomy, 364 is a mistake, but the text does not submit it as astronomy. It submits it as law. and a law is not falsified by a measurement. And the design goal, as the last chapter established, was never the sun in the first place. It was the week. A designer aiming at solar accuracy had 365 within easy reach. Egypt's civil calendar had used it for centuries. These designers chose 364. The one nearby number, the week divides cleanly. That is not a failed measurement. That is a successful design with a different objective. And drift was the cost of the objective, not the refutation of it. Notice, too, that the charge of bad astronomy assumes the designers did not know, that they believed the sun ran on 364 days and were simply mistaken. The text gives little ground for that. Its own tables track the moon's shortfall against the sun with care. Whoever composed this material could count. On the schematic reading, the likelier picture is stranger. Designers who could see the gaps in their own arithmetic and enshrined the number anyway, because the number answered to something higher than the sky. Then there is the detail. The failed science verdict cannot digest at all. This text criminalizes miscounting. First, Enoch 82, 4-6, blesses the righteous who do not sin as the sinners in the reckoning of their days, sin as the operative category for arithmetic. And the text carries a prophecy of corrupted time. First Enoch 82-8. In the days of the sinners, the years will be shortened, the rain will be withheld, and the crops will come late. The moon will alter her order and stray from her path, and sinners will err in the reckoning of the years. Be precise about what that passage is and is not. It is eschatological, a portrait of a disordered age in which even time runs wrong. It names no dates, identifies no era, and this episode applies it to nothing beyond the text. What it shows is the frame. In this document, timekeeping failure is a moral event, not a technical one. When the count goes wrong, it is because people have gone wrong. A text that thinks this way is not astronomy that failed. It is theology. And theology of this kind is not touched by a measurement of the sun. And then, the manner of death. The quiet fact that unravels the comfortable reading from the outside. If this calendar died of drift, the record should show gradual, embarrassed abandonment, a system quietly outgrown by people who notice the seasons. That is not what the record shows. The drift could be managed by any community that wanted to manage it, by correction, as Vanderkam reconstructs, or by holding the scheme as sacred arithmetic, regardless of the seasons, as Stern's reading would allow. What could not be managed was losing the argument over the temple. The next chapter documents that argument turning physical. Bad astronomy dies quietly. This calendar died in a war. Step back then and take stock of what these first 3 chapters have assembled. This is not a failed piece of ancient astronomy. It is a theology of time, a machine built to make sacred order arithmetical, in which miscounting is disobedience. The second half of this video follows that theology into history. The community that staked its identity on this calendar, the day 2 reckonings of time, collided in a documented confrontation, and how the calendar the church uses and the calendar the synagogue uses both descend from the side that won. Because the argument over this calendar did not stay on parchment. Two men are about to meet over a single date, and the day they met is documented in the hand of the losing side. It is near now. This calendar's death was not astronomical. It lost something other than accuracy. And the community that refused to let it lose carried it into the desert, where the war over it survives in their own writing. At Qumran, the 364-day calendar was not an antiquarian interest. It was identity, law, and battle line. By the end of this chapter, you will understand the command in the Book of Jubilees, the calendar texts in the caves, and the documented day when two reckonings of time collided. By the 2nd century BCE, the calendar had acquired a command form. The Book of Jubilees, a retelling of Genesis, and the opening of Exodus, taken by this episode strictly as a calendar witness, delivers the instruction directly. Jubilees 6:32-38. Command the children of Israel to keep the year by this reckoning, 364 days, so that the year is complete and the appointed times fall in their seasons. And then the warning, the sharpest sentence in the whole calendar tradition. Those who go by the moon will get it wrong, for the lunar count comes in year by year 10 days too soon. And they will confound the days, the holy with the profane, and the profane with the holy. Sit with that escalation. In the Astronomical Book, miscounting was sin. In Jubilees, it is contamination. A festival kept on the wrong date is not a festival at all. And the sacred itself is defiled by bad arithmetic. The calendar has stopped being cosmology. It has become a test of fidelity. Then, the caves. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls, the library associated on the standard account with the community settled at Qumran, the calendar material is not marginal. It is administrative. The library held multiple copies of the Enochic astronomical texts and of Jubilees, the calendar's charter documents, copied and kept. And alongside them sat the community's own instruments. The texts cataloged as 4 Q320 through 4 Q330. The Mishmarot, which roster the 24 priestly courses of Israel onto the 364-day grid. Which family stands duty, in which week, cycling through 6-year rounds, with Sabbaths and festivals mapped across the roster. Understand what documents like these are. Nobody drafts duty rosters for a thought experiment. Whatever the debate about the calendar's use in civil life beyond the settlement, Stern's caution from the last chapter stands. Within this community's own self-understanding, the 364-day year was operational. It assigned real families to real weeks of sacred service. Some of these rosters even synchronize the two systems, tracking the moon's dates against the 364-day grid, a community keeping precise account of a reckoning it rejected, and it marked a border. On the standard scholarly account, the calendar stood among the core markers of this community's separation from the Jerusalem establishment. The temple ran its sacred year on the lunisolar reckoning. The community ran its own on the 364-day count. The same land, the same God, the same festivals by name, falling on different days. Everything the first half of this episode raised in theory was now standing in stone and parchment. Two reckonings of the sacred, one temple between them, and no arithmetic by which both could be right. Other texts from the caves sharpen the border further. The community's rule, documents bind members to keep the appointed times by the community's own reckoning, neither to advance their times nor to fall behind any of their seasons, in the covenant language of the community rule. And one document, long read as a letter setting out the community's disagreements with its opponents, has been connected by some scholars to the calendar question as well, though its reconstruction is debated, and the connection is held more cautiously in recent scholarship. The precise weight of each text is argued over. The direction of the collection is not. This community treated the count of days as a boundary of belonging, which brings this episode at last to the document the prologue promised. Among the scrolls is a commentary on the biblical book of Habakkuk, the Pesher Habakkuk, cataloged as one QPHAB, which reads the prophet's ancient words as coded references to the commentator's own recent history. Verse by verse, it quotes the prophet and then declares what the words really concern: events in the commentator's own generation. Its cast wears code names. The teacher of righteousness, the community's revered founding figure, the wicked priest, his persecutor, a figure of priestly power in Jerusalem. Scholars have spent decades proposing historical candidates for both men, several high priests of the Hasmonean era for the one, competing reconstructions for the other. And this episode names none of them, because the text does not. The passage sits at column 11, lines 4 to 8. The wicked priest, it says, pursued the teacher of righteousness to the house of his exile, to swallow him up in his hot anger. And then the text dates the arrival. He appeared before them on the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, at the time of their fast, to confuse them, the text says, and to make them stumble on the day of fasting, the Sabbath of their rest. Now hold the problem this passage creates, because the whole episode has been building towards it. The Day of Atonement is the most restricted day of the Jewish year, a day of total fast and affliction, on which a priest of Israel, mounting an expedition against other Jews, is close to unthinkable. On Yom Kippur, a priest's place is in ritual, not on the road. The biblical legislation itself calls the day a Sabbath of complete rest. The very designation, the Pesher, echoes when it calls it the Sabbath of their rest. How could this man march on that day at all? On the widely held scholarly reading, the answer is the calendar. The teachers' community kept the Day of Atonement by the 364-day reckoning. The priest kept Jerusalem's lunisolar count. And on the priest's calendar, that date was not the Day of Atonement. It was nothing. An ordinary day, free for travel, free for confrontation. On that reading, and it should be said plainly, that it is the widely held scholarly reading, not an uncontested fact. The priest did not merely persecute the teacher. He timed the persecution by the gap between their calendars. On the teacher's calendar, it is the Day of Atonement. He is fasting. His community is fasting. On this day in his world, nothing moves. On the priest's calendar, it is an ordinary day. So he moves. He arrives during the fast. The text says, to confuse them, to make them stumble. 2 calendars, 1 date. Only one of them was free to march that day. And that was the point. This is the chapter's single claim. The calendar dispute was real enough to time a persecution by. Everything before this chapter was text, statutes, warnings, rosters. Here, on the widely held reading of 1 QPHAB 11:4-8, the dispute has a journey, a date, and a victim. One man marched on another man's holiest day, precisely because, on the marcher's calendar, it was no day at all. Sacred time had become a weapon, and the side that could not move that day was, by design, the side that kept the stricter count. The confrontation proves what the first half of this episode implied. Two sacred worlds could not share one land. And within a few generations, one of those worlds was gone, and the other had to rebuild time without a temple. The 364-day calendar did not fade. Its keepers were destroyed, and the reckonings that survived consolidated everything. By the end of this chapter, you will understand how the lunisolar count became the calendar of Judaism, and what happened to the solar year's last known keepers. In 66 CE, Judea rose against Rome, and the war reached the Dead Sea within 2 years. On the standard archaeological account, the settlement at Qumran was destroyed by Roman forces around 68 CE. The community's library survived because it was hidden in the caves. The community itself did not survive at all. After the war, the site never again housed the movement that had kept the 364-day count. 2 years later, Jerusalem fell, and the temple burned. And with the temple went the very thing the calendar war had been fought over. There was no longer a sanctuary whose sacred year had to be reckoned rightly, because there was no longer a sanctuary. The rosters in the caves were still mid-cycle when they were hidden. Schedules for years of priestly service that no one was left to keep. What emerged from the ruins was rabbinic Judaism, and it rebuilt sacred time on the lunisolar reckoning. The count descended from the temple's own practice. Months were declared on the sighting of the new moon, witnesses examined, a court announcing the month begun, an added month inserted when the year ran behind the seasons. Time in this system was administered, the opposite pole from Enoch's automatic grid, and the direct heir of the practice the desert covenanters had rejected. It prevailed in part because it was the incumbent, the reckoning by which the majority had actually kept the festivals, the count woven through the temple's remembered life. A calendar is among the hardest things in a culture to change because it lives in habit rather than argument, in when people fast, when they gather, when they rest. The desert's count had statute on its side. The moon's count had memory. After the war, memory was what remained. And when the survivors rebuilt, they rebuilt what they knew. Over the centuries that followed, observation gave way to calculation. A fixed computed calendar that needed no witnesses and no monthly court. Jewish tradition attributes the fixing of that computed calendar to the patriarch Hillel II in the 4th century CE. The attribution is traditional. The sources carrying it are late. And the scholarship describes something slower, a consolidation over centuries, with the fully fixed calendar emerging through a longer process rather than by a single decree. Either way, the destination is the calendar the synagogue keeps today, moon and sun together, computed in advance, administered by rule, and carrying nothing of Enoch's 364. And the 364-day year itself? It vanishes from Jewish practice. No later Jewish community is known to have kept it as a living calendar. It survived the way defeated texts survive, by being copied. The Book of Enoch traveled through Greek and into Ge'ez, the classical language of Ethiopia, and the Ethiopian Orthodox Church preserved the complete book within its scriptural canon, which is the only reason chapters 72 to 82 exist in full today. Had that one transmission line failed, this entire episode would be a reconstruction from Aramaic scraps. The margin between a text and no text was one church's decision to keep copying it. One precision matters here, and it matters a great deal. The Ethiopian church preserved the book. It did not adopt the book's calendar. Its own liturgical year is a separate system entirely. Preservation is not use. The calendar Uriel dictated was carried across 2,000 years by readers who honored the text and kept time by other means. This is the chapter's single claim. The calendar war was settled by history, not arithmetic. No council ever ruled the 364-day year theologically wrong. No argument defeated it. Its keepers were destroyed. The temple at the center of the dispute ceased to exist. And the count that survived was the count whose community survived. Calendars do not win arguments. Communities do. And their calendars inherit the world. The synagogue's reckoning consolidated. The desert's reckoning went silent. And the church, meanwhile, was keeping time by a calendar no Israelite tradition had ever kept at all. Christian sacred time runs on a Roman civil calendar, Julian first, then Gregorian, and the church fought its own calendar wars over it. By the end of this chapter, you will understand where the church's year actually comes from and what this episode's title finally means. Begin with the machine itself. Rome's civil reckoning was reformed under Julius Caesar, taking effect in 45 BCE. A year of 365 days, a leap day every fourth year, months of fixed length with no relation to the moon at all. Rome's months had drifted free of the moon long before Caesar. His reform perfected the divorce, pinning the civil year to the sun and leaving the sky's second clock out of the machine entirely. It was a civil instrument, built for administering an empire, terms of office, tax dates, army logistics, and its months still carry the mark of that world. July for Julius himself, August for his heir. It made no claim on the sacred. It was pagan Rome's operating machinery for time, which is precisely what made it adoptable. A calendar with no theology attached can carry anyone's. The church was born inside that Roman world, and it kept time the way its world did. As Christian communities spread through the empire, the 7-day week, Jewish in origin, and no part of Rome's older civil scheme, spread with them and settled across the Roman months, its days taking, in Roman usage, the names of planets and their gods, Saturn's day and the sun's day among them. In 321 CE, Constantine gave the day of the sun legal standing as a day of rest. What emerged was a hybrid with no precedent in Israel, Roman months inside a Roman year, a Semitic week running through them, and Christian feasts pinned across both. By the time the empire's faith changed, its clock did not need to. The feasts of the new religion were written into the ledger of the old one, Rome's calendar had arrived in Judea as imperial administration, but no Israelite sacred reckoning ever ran on it. The Church's sacred year, from early on, ran on nothing else. But one feast would not pin. Easter is tied to Passover, and Passover is lunar, so the Church inherited, inside its solar frame, a moving lunar target, and with it, a calendar war of its own. Early communities kept Easter by different reckonings. Some aligned with the Jewish count of Passover, others insisting on a Sunday. And the disagreement ran for generations. On the consensus account, the Council of Nicaea in 325 moved to settle a uniform Easter, kept on a Sunday, computed by the Church's own reckoning, independent of the Jewish calendar's count. However the details are reconstructed, the shape of the settlement is clear enough. A church declaring that it would own its own count of sacred time. The stake the prologue named, surfacing again in a different empire. And then the Church met drift. The Julian year runs 365 days and a quarter. The true solar year is slightly shorter, by about 11 minutes. 11 minutes sounds like nothing. Compounded, it is roughly 3 days of slippage every 4 centuries. And by the 16th century, the spring equinox had slid some 10 days from its calendared place, dragging the computation of Easter with it. In 1582, Pope Gregory XIII cut 10 days out of the calendar by decree and refined the leap year rule to hold the year against the sun. The point is structural, not polemical. A pope, correcting the astronomical drift of a pagan civil calendar in order to keep a Christian feast in its season. The Church did, for Caesar's calendar, precisely what no community was left alive to do for Enoch's. Drift kills no calendar that an institution is willing to maintain, a fact worth carrying back across this entire episode. And even the correction became a contest of authority. The Gregorian reform was a papal act, and much of Protestant Europe refused it for generations. England and its colonies held out until 1752. Several Orthodox churches keep the Julian reckoning for their liturgies to this day, which is why the churches of East and West often keep Easter on different Sundays. They compute the same feast from different calendars. Whoever accepts your calendar accepts your authority, and whoever refuses it is refusing something far larger than a date. So run the title's contrast to ground in one precise statement. The calendar the Church uses is Rome's, the Julian civil solar year, reformed as the Gregorian in 1582, and the Church's liturgical year has run on that Roman frame from antiquity to this morning. The calendar the synagogue uses is the rabbinic lunisolar reckoning, moon months corrected to the sun, descended from the temple's own practice. And neither one, not the Church's solar year, not the synagogue's lunisolar year, descends from the calendar Uriel dictated. Enoch's 364 days survived only as text, preserved inside one church's canon, read, copied, honored, and kept by no one. The Wednesday New Year comes round on nobody's calendar. The Friday Atonement of the Reconstruction is observed by no one alive. This is the chapter's single claim, and it is the episode's destination. Every living tradition rejected Enoch's arithmetic and kept Enoch's claim. because the claim was never really the number. The claim was that the count of days is a covenant, that sacred time has an owner, and that owning the count is owning the sacred. The synagogue asserts it through a computed lunisolar year. The church asserts it through a reformed Roman one. The arithmetic died in the desert. The claim is still in force everywhere the sacred is scheduled. Pull back now and let the whole account stand in sequence. 6 movements from dictation to defeat. First, the dictation. A calendar delivered by an angel, not observed, not derived, delivered as statute. First, Enoch 72:1. Uriel, the holy angel, showing Enoch the laws of the luminaries. The sky itself presented as a lawkeeper. The sun in its gates, not traveling but complying. Enoch writes what he is shown, and what he is shown is jurisprudence. Before this text is a calendar, it is a claim about what creation is, not a spectacle, but a legislation already in force. Then, the machine. 364 days, 52 weeks, no remainder. 12 months of 30 days, 4 days standing at the hinges of the seasons. Every festival nailed to its weekday forever. The Sabbath never displaced by any holy day, in any year to the end of time. New Year on a Wednesday forever, because the sun was made on a Wednesday. Sacred order made arithmetical. A liturgy you could compute. Then, the criminalization. First, Enoch 82:4-6. Blessing on those who reckon their days rightly, sin on those who do not. And 1 Enoch 82:8. An age foretold, in which time itself is miskept, the years shortened, the moon astray, sinners in error over the count. A text in which getting the date wrong is disobedience, arithmetic is made to carry moral weight, and disordered time is the signature of a disordered age. Then, the community. Jubilees 632-38, turning the count into a command, and lunar reckoning into contamination. The caves at Qumran, holding the Mishmarot, real priestly families rostered onto the 364-day grid, and rule texts binding members, neither to advance nor to delay the appointed times. A movement that made this reckoning a marker of who it was, kept the calendar's charter texts like identity papers, and carried them into the desert. Then, the confrontation. Pesher Habakkuk, column 11. 1 date, 2 calendars. A community fasting on its Day of Atonement, and a priest marching free to march, because on his count that day was nothing at all. The identities stay in code, because the text keeps them there. The reading stays labeled, because the scholarship does. But the date, the 1 date, is written. On the widely held reading, a persecution timed by the gap between 2 reckonings of the sacred, the day the calendar war stopped being an argument. And then, the victory of other clocks. The desert community destroyed, the temple burned. The lunisolar reckoning consolidated in the synagogue. The Roman solar calendar carried by the church and reformed by a pope. The reckoning your own devices keep is the Gregorian descendant of Caesar's count, the far end of the war's winning side. The war over sacred time ended with Enoch's calendar surviving only as text, copied into one church's canon, and kept by no one, though the angel who dictated it was not finished. What Uriel delivers to Enoch does not end with the counting of days. Every tradition that touched this calendar now keeps a different one. The synagogue reckons by moon and sun together, as the Jerusalem temple did. The church reckons by a Roman civil calendar, reformed by a pope, that no ancient Israelite ever kept. And the calendar an angel dictated as the architecture of sacred time survives only as text, copied, carried, preserved in one church's canon, kept by no one. The Astronomical Book claims that time has an owner, and that the reckoning of days is not a convenience, but a covenant. Every tradition that rejected this calendar kept that claim. They simply transferred it to a different count. Whether the war over the 364 days was a dispute about astronomy that dressed itself as theology, or a dispute about authority that has never actually ended, whose count is kept, and who is free to march on whose holiest day, is not a question the calendar resolves.